What about the PBMs? Do you expect them to be changing their role? They're getting more.
It's very clear that they've become a
Right.
lot more aggressive in the non-oncology drug space.
They are. Right.
Whether or not
Right.
they'll be as aggressive, Steve Miller at ESI will be as aggressive with oncology drugs remains to be seen. But I think as a health plan, we're willing to create preferred and non-preferred drugs and have differential cost sharing, but we're not willing yet, for the most part, to step patients through the less costly, equally effective drug. I think what's kind of interesting, though, is that we've talked a lot about accountability amongst providers for cost and outcomes, but we haven't talked at all about accountability for manufacturers of drugs, devices, or diagnostics for the performance of their products. And I think that's an emerging area of interest. We, in fact, have a contract with a manufacturer that says if their drug doesn't achieve the progression-free survival that they found in their clinical trial, that there will be a shared reimbursement to the plan.
You're talking about subsequent data in the marketplace demonstrating subsequently after approval that the drug is delivering certain clinical benefits. So,
right. Yeah.
Okay.
Previously, just like physicians,
So
manufacturers have gotten paid regardless of whether or not the drug works. And the notion in these value-based or outcomes-based contracts is to hold manufacturers accountable for appropriate use and the outcomes.
But it's interesting because what you're talking about, what we were talking about was holding them accountable on a patient-by-patient basis to see how the drug's performing. Now, what we've said is the government rules mostly inhibit that, at least in the Medicare setting. What you're talking about is holding them accountable on a global scale for demonstrating certain things post-market and in offering a rebate if it doesn't do that. So a drug that gets to the market showing progression-free survival has to demonstrate overall survival in a certain period of time, or there'd be a rebate. Is that, am I hearing you right?
The challenge is a lot of these drugs now are being approved after phase 1 or phase 2 clinical trials with no outcomes other than overall or partial or complete response rates. And so it makes it easier in a sense because those happen in a much more timely fashion, but we really don't know if we're getting value out of that until much later.
And who's negotiating that kind of a discount for you? Do you want to talk a little bit more about where you've done that as a plan?
Well, I think we're negotiating those types of things as a plan ourselves. I think a lot of manufacturers, we've talked about performance-based contracting or outcomes-based contracting for years, and it's really never taken off. And I think manufacturers are now realizing that their value proposition has to be more than copay assistance programs and nurse call lines and glitzy websites.
And there have been, we've talked with a number of manufacturers that basically have gone into CMS and have talked about some of these novel agreements because they're basically looking at it and saying, you know, and I'm not making the argument for the drug companies, but there are even impediments of just literally blanket reducing their price with the ASP system, and you look at all those consequences there. So what they're doing is they're looking at some of these and they're going in and talking to CMS, and for the first time at least, what I'm hearing is on both sides sort of an agreement or a cooperation to say, let's make this work. The problem is there's a lot of structural impediments in the Medicare system that may not be just you know, the ability of the CMS to sort of issue some new regulations and make this happen, that it may take some legislative work as well too. Then we get into the politics of this. But I think I'm encouraged that there are a lot of discussions that are happening with the manufacturers and even on the CMS side to say, let's try to make this work. And an openness on manufacturers, probably because of all the press and everything, but an openness of manufacturers to try to make this happen.
I think the challenge in all of this, though, is do we have the data to adjudicate a pay-for-outcomes contract? I agree with you, Ted, that the biggest impediment to a value-based contract or an outcomes-based contract on the infused side is the ASP pricing. It's a lot easier on the oral side, but I think manufacturers are realizing that they have to bring more to the table than a discount. They have to stand behind their product, and so I see early indications that manufacturers are willing to do that. They're testing the waters just like we are to see if this type of arrangement makes sense.
So what I wanted to have happen is that we're talking about the providers and value, we're talking about the manufacturers and value. I'd like to take the Congress and the White House and basically pay them on value as well.